All right, great. Good morning, everyone. I hope everyone had a nice holiday, and hopefully for most of you, it's a short week. Welcome again to our Teams for Tuesdays events. So we're just going to jump right into it. Again, the flow is always the same. We're going to start with the quick intro. We'll talk about what's new. I know we had one last week, but we're going to cover a lot of everything basically that dropped in December. We're going to go into that. Questions and answers. So we're going to go back to kind of the Q&A format. We've had demos the last couple of times, but in this case, we had some good questions come in. So we're going to go ahead and spend time on that and address those. And then we'll just have the outro, the quick goodbyes, how to get in contact with us. If there's any questions dropped in the box, we'll cover that. So again, Teams for Tuesdays, we normally do this like every other Tuesday. So we'll probably set up and start getting these going for the new year in 2021 and get that cadence going again. We had one last week around collaboration and tools like that. This week is going to be around voice and voice services, which most of you should know that you've showed up. You've got the invites that Carly put out there. Please do use the Q&A box if you have any questions to drop in. If it's more private or you just want a direct response, just go ahead and shoot it over to info@egroup. That Carly sees those, she's going to get those over to me, and we'll answer those and send those back to you. At the end, if we have any posted questions, I'll go ahead and read those out. We'll just answer those there. So if it's your question, feel free to stick around just for a little bit longer, and we'll get that addressed for you. Okay, so who are we? We're eGroup. A lot of you hopefully already know who we are, but we've been around for 20 plus years now. Started by Mike Carter in 1999, and we are headquartered down in Mount Pleasant, South Carolina. And for those of you that think it's hot all year round, I can tell you it's not. It's been freezing the last few days. We are a Microsoft Gold partner, so obviously you're here. We're here talking about Teams and the Microsoft platform. We do work with Microsoft Azure as well as the Microsoft 365 stack, which includes Teams. But we also do traditional data center work as well. So if you're looking at refreshing a traditional data center, you're not going to a public cloud, we help do those as well. We have a whole separate team that manages that, and then of course everything in between with the hybrid stuff, integrating traditional networks with hybrid data centers. So that's kind of our space. And, if you have additional questions outside of Teams in that space, feel free to give us a ring. I myself have been with eGroup now for over 8 years. I do have a background on the Microsoft stack, and I'm pretty well versed from the technical perspective on the cloud offerings. Prior to joining eGroup, I did actually work out with the Department of Defense and kind of ran the web services team for Navy Medicine over there. All right, guys, what's new? So a lot's dropped in December. We covered most of these actually last week, and we kind of showed some experiences around those on here. The big one I missed on here, actually, it's not on this slide, is the breakout rooms. So breakout rooms did just drop. If you're not sure what that is, it's essentially you can have a meeting, you can have multiple participants, and during that meeting, you can send them off to their own private meeting areas, right? They're creating spaces. So you might split them off for work groups or something like that, small collaboration sessions, and then bring them back into the main session to share what they've done, right? And same thing with files and things that are shared in there. It's really the normal meeting experience. Just let you carve that up. The new meeting join experience, it's pretty apparent. If you're running Teams today, you're going to see it. It's in your face when you join. The big thing out of that, though, isn't really the UI change, but it's the experience change when you want to swap devices. So like I'm here on my desktop now. If I grab my phone, I need to run out. It's going to tell me on there, hey, you're on this meeting. Do you want to switch it over to this device? And it will let me switch that over, and vice versa, from my mobile back to my desktop. And it does that without dropping me from the meeting. So it doesn't interrupt the meeting, and it doesn't have to let everybody else know that I've switched devices. So that's really nice. Pinning messages and channels. So again, if you're experienced with Teams and you have Teams and you have channels, one of the things you couldn't do before was set a message, right? So if you've participated in news groups and even back in the day, bulletin boards, you used to be able to pin messages. You drop in a channel, it's always up there. It's like read this first kind of thing. You can do that now. You can pin them up there. So very helpful. The Teams developer early opt-in. So for those of you in the IT space, if you want to get an early preview of things before they're rolling out, you can now opt into this. Do know that a lot of times some of these features aren't going to show up unless you have somebody else that's participating with you. So for like meeting items, for instance, there's a new instead of the raised hand option, there's little hearts and things that show up. You could see them and you could click them, but nobody else in the meeting will see them unless they're also on that developer early adopter preview. So just know it might take 2 of you to test things out. Schedule do not disturb. So Teams syncs with Outlook already. If you have something blocked out, it will show you as, do not disturb, you're in a meeting and so forth. But if you want to say, schedule a break over lunch, you got a lunch meeting, you can set that up so that Teams basically goes into do not disturb mode, leaving your Outlook or mail where it is, kind of disconnects it, but also lets you schedule that time instead of having to go in and then flip it. Because a lot of times you're just going to go and set it, forget about it, never put it back, and it kind of takes it out of that matched mode with Outlook. So that's a pretty nice deal there. Noise cancellation, we were just having a talk about this. This is built into Windows Teams now, and it does help greatly. It's set at a level that's enabled by default for everyone. So it's going to be on, you're going to get to experience it, or rather not experience the noise anymore from there. But there is another level that you can turn it on to, which is called high, and it works really well. I mean, we were testing it out, crumpling up papers, doing all kinds of noise, and it was filtering those out very well. So if you have colleagues that are out there and they don't use the headsets, they're using their keyboards, and the microphones are right on their keyboards, you can usually hear the banging, and I think everybody's experiencing that. This will help decrease that in those types of scenarios, in those meetings. The keyboard scenario doesn't completely wipe out that sound, but it certainly makes it a little more tolerable when it happens. So it's definitely a welcome addition. The last one I'm going to do, this is more for the guys that administer it, changing how meetings are saved. So today I can go in, we can have a meeting, click save, it goes to another service called Stream. For internal use, it works very well. If you're not familiar with Stream, it's kind of like an organizational YouTube. You can set up channels and all those kind of things where your teams go in, it gets saved into Teams. It's really nice, seamless, and it works very well. Where it starts to have an issue is if you want to share that externally. So we've had to download those into like an MP4 format, then load them like into OneDrive, and then send the share links out to share externally. So this can be changed now. It's rolling out now. It's opt-in now. So if you're not the administrator, you have to talk to your administrators. They'll have to look at it and turn it on in a policy. And you can do this on a user-by-user basis, at least right now, where those videos are going to be stored in OneDrive as MP4. So it will use the OneDrive player. You can then share it out. You can apply retention policies and a lot of other things that we couldn't do before. Starting in January, they're going to start rolling this change out to everyone, and it's going to be something that everybody's going to get pushed into regardless. So it's out there. It's worth experimenting with if you're running Teams now and you're using the meeting recordings. Okay, jumping into questions and answers. We had a few questions that came in specifically for this meeting around Teams Voice. So I've ordered them so they kind of make sense as we go through, and we're going to hit them. And the first one, really, it's kind of like, I've got Teams, I'm using it. I'm using the VoIP services, and I'm using the meetings, and I'm using the chat functions. But it'd be nice, like, how do I use it with my phone? The entire premise of why we're here, right, is the voice services. And to be honest, there's two ways to doing it, right? So we've had other services that really, or other webinars that we've done here on voice services that go into more depth, but you're essentially going to go one of two ways. You're going to go all Microsoft, right? All in with their licensing. They have the licensing you can buy, and you can assign them just like you assign your Exchange licensing or anything else. You can buy phone plans, and it's all through Microsoft. They handle the carrier services and everything, right? You just assign the licensing, and the pricing is set per user, and it is what it is there. The other option is what's called Teams Direct Routing. Essentially, that lets you take your team services, push that out to another third-party service, so another external voice solution. So in this case, for instance, eGroup, we work with a company called Scipio. And, so we take this direct routing, we hook it up with Scipio, and they manage the voice services. So Microsoft still handles Teams and the support function from that, but we work with Scipio on the voice side of things. So things like number porting, dialing, if we have issues with voice and routing, those are the folks we call. Now, there's a lot of different questions that you could ask to determine which way is best for you. And some of that's going to come down to simple things as cost, right? In most cases, when we're talking about just calling plans, for instance, most folks that are offering it, like Scipio, are really matching really close to what Microsoft offers from a cost perspective. But some of the benefits are they bring some value-added services. They have some additional E911 capabilities that Microsoft doesn't have, as well as different support channels, right? So if I want to call in an issue with my voice services on Microsoft, I'm going through the normal support channels that I have and going through the team, routing it to them. If I'm going to do a number port, I'm working with their port team, which can have a little bit of a larger delay than if I'm working directly with someone like a carrier aggregator, like a Scipio services, right? So there can be, support considerations there as well. And other considerations are discounts too in the pricing. In some cases, if you're on an EA or you're working directly with Microsoft, they might be throwing in some benefits for you there that really is going to make the native plans very attractive to you. If you have existing equipment and phones and other things like that, well, then that might take that off the table for you. You might be looking at direct routing, right? So just know out of that, there's two ways to do it. It's all cloud, all Microsoft, and then there's Microsoft plus another service or system. Could be a hosted service, completely all cloud still, or it could be something you already have locally. All right, let's talk about this one here. Yes, so call centers, is it a thing? And it absolutely is. There's two ways to look at it, right? We have native features, and we also have some extension features that are available. Because as we saw, even with Microsoft, right, we have all in cloud in Microsoft. We also have, direct routing and things that go out to other services. So when we look at native features, so I go in, I have Microsoft, I have my licensing, phone system, everything's all on the cloud side. In Teams right now, right? You can set up your auto attendance, your IVR. So you can have the call-ins, press 1 to go here, press 2 to go there. Call queues, which are essentially like hunt groups, if you're familiar with those, right? I'm going to call in, I might have a help desk, I want it to ring 4 different places, or I want it to ring in sequence. I can set those up, right? I have those recorded messages. I can chain those together. I can put an auto attendant with a call queue. We actually did one of these in depth a few weeks ago. We actually went in and built those out. Call transfers, there's warm and cold transfers. I will tell you in Teams the way it works. If I'm on a call and I want to transfer it to somebody else, they also have to have a Teams number. They have to be on this side of Teams. The way I do a warm transfer is it's actually going to be by IM. So it's not going to be like going on hold and talking to somebody. It pops up another little chat window. I say, hey, I'm going to transfer this call to you, and I get a little button that says transfer, and I can move it over. Call parking, if you don't know what that is, that's kind of where I literally park the call, it goes on hold, but instead of doing a transfer, what I do is I basically have a code to pick up. So if you've ever been in the supermarket, you're like, hey, call on line 2, or, customer needs help on this line, that's essentially what it is. As long as you have the code and you're enabled for that, anybody can pick it up, enter the code, and then transfer that call over. Call recording is there as well, but it's on demand, right? So a lot of call centers, you need that to be automatic. That's not here. So the user actually has to push record to record that in there. If they don't push record, then it doesn't happen. Call masking, essentially the outbound call, right? If you want it to look like a service number. So everybody internally has their own number, but when it goes out, when it shows up on my caller ID, you want it to look like the incoming call bound number that's to the IVR or the routing number. You can do that as well on Teams. And again, once you have voice services stood up, it's all available to you in the Teams interface. And regardless, if it's Microsoft native or you're going with like a hosted service, like I said, what we do with Scipio, all of these are available to you. Other things you don't really get, but that you're going to look for like a call center add-on for, are things like wall boards, right? Those of you familiar with call centers that are asking, the big boards that show the number of calls coming up and who's got calls, active times, those type of things. The manager kind of live active calls, same thing on the dashboard. How do I see those if you're looking for like call avoidance and those types of things? The barge in or listen in type of capabilities, right, on a call. So that would require a third party there. And the mandatory call recording, we talked about that just a bit, that, Teams on its own, you have to hit the button. If you want mandatory call recording, you're kind of going to go with a third-party service, and then you can set those on based on policy, and they're just going to record in the background for you. And there's additional reporting. So there's a lot of reports available out of the box in Teams as well, and but a lot of call center type of reports that you might want, and from tracking capabilities, you can still get that data, but you're probably going to end up exporting it, putting it in something like Excel or Power BI, and creating those dashboards on your own with the Microsoft Teams solutions. Most of the third parties here that you'll integrate with are very specific. They meet the call center needs, so they're going to have call center type reports and probably customizable reports for you as well within the context of their software. So Microsoft does work with a few third parties that they certify for Teams. Now, this process is mainly around the API integrations, which is fairly new, right? Those just kind of went live. You could always use direct routing and just send all of your voice to a completely separate system, and all of these things can still happen, right? Because Teams is then just a client and interface, and the voice services are being routed over to another place that handles it. The APIs kind of allow these to talk back to Teams and trigger things within Teams natives as well. So Things like Landis Technology, Five9, 8x8, are just a handful of it. There's probably a good 15 or 16 certified partners now that are working with Microsoft on their call center technology. But even if you have one that's not certified and it's already in place, if they support like external voice providers and they have a method for bringing that into the system, I'm sure that'll work with Teams as well with the direct routing features. So all in all, call center is a thing. It is a thing in Teams. How far you need to go with it really depends on your own needs and business needs there, right? Small call center, 2, 3, 4, 5 people can probably get away with the native features. If you're bigger, you have a more established, more mature kind of support setup there, and you need some of these other features that I just mentioned, you're probably going to look for a third-party add-on product to help support that. One other note with that, those third parties and the APIs integrations, there are additional licenses needed with Teams. The advanced communication, it's a whole nother SKU that you have to get that kind of opens up those APIs for those services as well. So be aware that beyond the Teams and the Teams voice, there's another add-on license there. Then there's also the cost of the third party that you have to consider there. Okay, here's an interesting one that came in. We had a question came in. They use Teams, they use it internally. They're doing the same thing: the chats, the Teams, the meetings. At least with the VoIP capabilities, none of the voice services currently, but they have separate voice services, right? They've already got PBXs. Those are private branch exchanges. If you're not sure what those are, if you've got like a closet or a telephone network out there, that's probably a PBX in there. Essentially, you've got something coming in internally that's connecting your devices out to the outside phone world. So they have it set up for branch offices, and they're probably not retiring this for a while. So what does Teams do in this circumstance? Well, it doesn't necessarily have to do anything, right? I mean, it's already working. You're already using these features alongside what you currently have. So there may not be a reason to bridge that gap or to replace anything, right? This becomes more of a business decision than a technical decision. And there are a few questions that you really have to go through to start asking yourself when you're on there, right? Do I have a problem with the current system, right? I have it, I've got the equipment, the investment's there. Is there something wrong that's really going to force me to go out of it? Is the problem so big that I know I have to add on to the system? I got more things to do here. Maybe I got to buy some edge equipment to fix this problem or add capabilities. And when I look at that cost, I might look at, well, what does it take to move to like a cloud system with Teams or a hybrid system? Might make sense there, right? But there's a lot of digging I have to go in there to make sure that's the case. If there's nothing wrong with it, then I'm probably not going to be able to build a good business case here. Now, that being said, that's kind of the rip and replace there, but it doesn't mean that there aren't other use cases where it might slide in. Other things to consider is, are you locked in, right? So if you have direct relationship with carriers, a lot of time those guys have anywhere from like 18 to 36-month contracts, and it may not make sense to move, but you might start planning ahead of what you're going to do, and maybe move outside of those dedicated contracts. If you're directly with AT&T, to go with someone that's more of an aggregate, right? So when we work with Scipio, they deal with all the contracting on the back end. They deal with AT&T. They deal with Verizon. They deal with the overseas networks. All right, if you have those needs, so you're basically paying them to manage that part of it, and you're not locked into those long-term contracts. So when those are coming up for renewals, that's a consideration of what this could bring in here, especially if you're going to retire that equipment. Other considerations are maybe we just got a subset of users that benefit. Right? You have all of this stuff on premises already, or maybe it's just another service like RingCentral or something like that. And you're okay with how the users interact with it, but they also want to interact with Teams. You want to add Teams as that client in there. So you could take some of those users, put them up in this direct routing type of scenario, and then connect them to the other service. Now, there's more that goes into that. If the service supports it directly, there's probably nothing more you have to do except for tell them that's what I want to do, and then you'll set up Teams to talk to the service. If you have like your local PBXs, for instance, you may have to put in some edge equipment to make that work. Those are called SBCs, or session border controllers. You can do those directly, host them directly, or you may go with someone else that provides that capability for you. But essentially, it provides that translation layer from when I initiate a Teams call, it goes through that, translate it for your PBX. Other considerations, right, are your other equipments tied into those PBXs. So if I go all Teams, for instance, rip out my PBX, I've also got to think about phones and other things like that. But it's worth noting that's actually a big business question happening now, because so much of this is just software. I can have my numbers, I can have it on my phone, I tie it in there, I can call from my phone, I can call from my desktop. And when you buy a phone that's like a Teams phone, that's all it is. It's a device that looks like a phone, but it's a little mini computer and it's running the Teams interface on it. So there's an opportunity to actually get out of that, recycling that equipment, right? And then using those resources and reallocate those funds to other initiatives, because you won't necessarily need them anymore if you can get those folks just fine talking on a headset on their devices that they already have, instead of getting an actual desk phone, or just reducing it. In some cases, you have shared spaces where it makes sense to keep those around. So lots of different options there. And again, it's more of like a business decision and what I can get out of it. And it doesn't always mean that there's a need for it. I mean, I'm down with it, but I mean, I've certainly had conversations with customers where it just didn't make sense. What they had was working. They wanted some of the benefits of the Teams. They saw where it went, but the cost jump it didn't make sense. You know, they weren't getting enough value to justify the difference in that cost, at least at this time, with what their usage was. Other scenarios here with voice, and we didn't go much into it, but it's on the meeting side of things. So usually when we're having these conversations around the Teams voice and the capabilities, it's about the direct dial in, dial out, just like I use my phone, right? And hitting the number going out. But there's also the shared meeting capabilities. So when I have a Teams meeting by itself, anybody can hit the button, they can jump in and they can use it, but you can't dial in. It's not going to integrate your phone system into that. There's another license you can add on to that specifically for that scenario. And it's important to understand too, as well, as even in that direct routing scenario with a third-party service, if you want this capability in Teams, you're going to add this meetings audio service. Microsoft currently doesn't support that, at least with our commercial subscriptions, allowing to route those type of calls out. You have to use the Microsoft meeting service for that capability. That also has the capabilities for dial out from a meeting. So, you know, when you're in a meeting, you have it, I got a number, I can call in, it's fine. So I can use the app, I can call in audio only, but there's also the capability from inside the meeting to actually call somebody else on your normal phone network, right? So I can be in a meeting and call myself. I can be in a meeting and call somebody else to bring them in on the phone if they're having trouble, and introduce them in there. That also uses kind of the voice services. That requires that meeting service add-on, and it comes with a small pool of minutes per user that you can use for that capability. But if you're going to use it a lot, you're probably going to have to add in kind of communication credits or a bucket of credits that are based on a per minute rate for people that are calling out. But again, that's kind of that hybrid scenario that we're talking about. Maybe I just want to move my meetings over to that for user meetings, and I'm going to keep everything on premises. And especially if I've got like big Cisco rooms, I know most places aren't using those right now, but you may not swap those out, right? You might let users conduct these own meetings from their desk and those small meetings, but your big, executive meetings, the big gatherings, when those happen again, you're going to go back and use your Cisco rooms, and they can work side by side. So, again, it might be a subset of users using Teams, maybe some of those using those Ciscos in those rooms, maybe everybody gets covered for the Teams individuals while you still use those rooms. And there's just almost an unlimited number of scenarios that are, again, driven more from a business standpoint than a technology standpoint, and the needs of what you're trying to do there. So, okay, that was it here. I'm going to check over. I'm just going to shoot over. I'm not sure if we have any questions. It looks like I don't have any other questions in the queue to answer, but I know I gave you a lot of kind of it depends types of scenarios there. So if you have a particular scenario you need a little bit more detail on, or you want to know more specifics on some of the things that I talked about, like whether or not the cloud licensing makes sense, or going with like direct routing, reach out, let us know, hit us up, happy to answer those. I will tell you, we don't work directly on the call center side of things outside of Teams. So if it's in Teams, developing call queues and those type of things, absolutely. But when we start going out to those things like that I mentioned, like Five9s, we don't integrate that specifically, but I can certainly help you around that, answer questions, and kind of give you more background on that and some of the costing and things like that if that's what you need. So thanks for joining us again. Feel free to reach out, if you have additional questions, and I'm happy to answer as well as anybody on my team. So I appreciate everyone spending a Tuesday morning with us, and Happy New Year for everyone. And we will talk to you here in a few weeks. Thank you.